Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 13th of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. If you've been doing that recently, you would know that rain is still in the forecast for many parts of Alaska, and we're continuing to track that into the interior and across western and northern Alaska. You can always get that information about your forecasts at 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Or you can start with us online at weather.gov/Alaska. You'll get the very same information on Marine VHF or your NOAA weather radio. If you can't find what you're looking for, feel free to send me an email anytime, david.snider@noaa.gov, whether it's about any of the forecast office information that you find around Alaska, the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit and the recent website changes there, the National Tsunami Warning Center in Palmer, Alaska, or anything else that has to do with the Weather Service. I'm happy to help you find what you need and see if I can't make that work for what you're trying to do. Here's some of the weather headlines I found for you today. The periods of rain across the interior are raising flooding concerns in the interior, especially the upper Tanana Valley around the Salcha, the Goodpaster River, and across some of the northern regions there. We'll take a look at that here in just a minute where the flood watches are posted. We're also going to watch the next wave of cold weather interact with the wet air that's moving into the Brooks Range. Snow may reach into Adigan Pass as a result. A couple inches possible there over the next couple nights. And coming up this Tuesday, the 1967 Chena River flood happened 50 years ago. It's probably difficult to think it's been that long, but there's still some signs of the flooding in town there. And if you look carefully, you'll be able to see more signs as we head into Tuesday, as a dedication and unveiling ceremony of some sign markers up and down the Chena will be posted there. On August 15th, those spots will be revealed. So if you're in the Fairbanks area, I'll stop by and check out some of those new signs. Also, a collaborative effort with the National Weather Service and, of course, Alaska State Parks. So something to keep an eye on there in the Fairbanks region. And always remember what can happen when we have just a little bit too much water in all the wrong places. Now, here's a look upstream toward the Fairbanks region, including Chena, the Goodpaster, and into the Tanana Valley there. A flood watch is posted because of 1.5 to 2 inches of rain in some places along those regions in the last 24 hours or so. We're still watching for some flooding potential there across the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys as well. So an advisory is in that region through at least Tuesday morning, I believe. Now, as we get into the Adigan Pass region, we don't have any advisories for winter weather just yet, but the same system that's been pushing a lot of wet weather into the Brooks Range is going to meet up with cold air in the next couple days, and as a result of that, it won't be a surprise to see a couple inches of snow in Adigan Pass. So just be prepared if you're traveling through that region or perhaps still working on your backcountry camping experience that the weather conditions may be changing where you are. Now, one thing that is changing is the level of fire danger. It won't be very long before we're not using the map anymore, simply because fire danger is being greatly reduced every time one of these waves of wet weather moves past the central and eastern interior. We've seen this expansive all across the Yukon Valley and the Brooks Range earlier this season, and it's slowly being whittled away from west to east. August is the wettest month overall in Alaska, so no surprise that we're coming up on the tail end of just hit and miss high fire danger, but it's still there, and that still means you need to be careful with fire. Always check for your local conditions there with your local fire official before you do any open burning. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture now from earlier this morning. You can see the sun coming up and the spiraling area of low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska and mainland Alaska. If you look carefully, you can see kind of some rough bubbling of clouds across the eastern interior. And in those places today, we've seen showers and thunderstorms. Watch one more time here from Arctic Village to Fairbanks, Northway to Dawson and Whitehorse. This is where that convective zone is. And we've seen, there you go, the showers and thunderstorms developing in this region throughout the afternoon. They've been, I'd say, isolated to maybe a stretch would be widely scattered, but there certainly has been some coverage in that region. So A sign that summer hasn't given up just yet. But on the back side of this, of course, is the colder weather that's spilling down the west coast and into the northwestern Chukchi Sea. And so conditions will be changing there. In fact, winds will be coming up in the next couple days. You'll see that on the marine maps here in just a little bit. The south side of the storm is grabbing moisture, moving that right into southeast. So, of course, there are some areas of wet weather there today, and that trend should continue as well. But the sky is breaking up across the western Gulf around Kodiak Island. You've seen a little more sunshine in the region today, maybe not always on top of you. And then out to the west, you can see signs of colder air interacting with the marine environment across the Bering. Those speckledy clouds indicate cold air aloft passing through the region. Here's a look at the infrared satellite picture now, a slightly different measurement of the clouds and a depiction of its motion. And you can see a little bit more of the north slope. Notice how a lot of that moisture is still spilling over the Brooks Range and wrapping into the western and central interior. As a result of that, the rain is going to continue in this region even as low pressure is moving eastward. It's managed to grab a hold of that very wet atmosphere and spiral that in. So we've still got a lot of interaction between the storm energy of that low pressure system over Alaska and that very wet atmospheric environment moving over most of Alaska really right now. We've seen rainfall totals anywhere from 1 to about 2 inches across the broad interior of Alaska. Some of those have been pushing or just nudging up on records around the Anchorage area. Places like Valdez City and Valdez saw about 1.5 to almost 1.75 inches or so around the region. Annette saw 1.3 inches of rain, and or actually 1.2 inches of rain. Anchorage had about 1.3. So, you know, as far as rainfall goes in Anchorage to southeast, when you can compare Anchorage to Annette, that's probably a pretty wet day for Anchorage, wouldn't you say? Out across the west, clouds are quickly streaming in across the western Bering Sea. One thing to watch is the jet stream that's diving out of the north and grabbing a hold of a weak area of low pressure right here. This is going to spin up and then zip right across the Gulf of Alaska heading for southeast. That will probably bring you another better chance of rainfall as we get into the early part of the week. So here are the surface charts. See if you keep your eye on this area of low pressure right here across the western Gulf and North Pacific. This afternoon, showers and thunderstorms across the eastern interior. We've got rain across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Periods of rain, even heavy rain, in fact, around the Ruby region showing up this afternoon. Periods of rain and fog across the YK Delta, fog through the Bering Strait and out towards St. Matthew. High pressure here across the western Bering Sea at 1,017 millibars. And then pockets of rainfall, and most of that moderate to light across sections of the Panhandle this afternoon. Tonight's forecast shows low pressure stretching out across the Gulf of Alaska. We'll keep showers across southeast, periods of rain and fog across the interior. A lot of that starting to break up across south central. The heaviest of that certainly came through earlier this morning and overnight. And then we start to look at some of the snow and rain mixed with snow across the Brooks Range and into the coastal plain. A lot of what we'll see around the Beaufort Seacoast should still be rain and fog, but high pressure here at 1,021 millibars is pushing colder air into the coastal plain, and several waves of low pressure will be wrapping around that overall circulation we just saw in the satellite picture. As we get into tomorrow, that colder air will continue pushing southward. It looks like most areas will be warm enough for mainly rain. Some exceptions may be the tops of the Brooks Range themselves, but it'll be a close call. On the south side of this, we expect to see showers and thunderstorms again. Some of that should be well north of the Fairbanks region, but for Fort Yukon, maybe just south of Arctic Village out toward Eagle, don't be surprised if you get a rumble of thunder or a flash of lightning throughout the day. As we look at southeast, showers continue there. Here's that low pressure system that's moving out of the North Pacific and is going to zip across the Gulf of Alaska. As that spins up, the jet stream should help to grab a hold of that and sling that right into southeast as we get into Tuesday. So once again, keep your eye on that. Showers across St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew, and down the YK Delta. And we'll keep some showers across the central and western Aleutians as we get into your Monday. Here's Tuesday, and there goes that low pressure system with a front now wrapping in and including. That means a better chance for rainfall. Not a big surge of cold or warm air at this point, but enough to get the rain clouds going again across southeast. So periods of light to moderate rainfall at times, and showers for Prince William Sound and places down toward Seward. As you get into the Kenai Peninsula and Cook Inlet region, it looks like a lot of the lower elevations there, including maybe Homer, should have a generally cloudy day, but not necessarily a wet day. And that across the western Alaska Range, periods of rain and showers, a lot more of that concentrated across the interior, the southwest, and certainly the northwest. And again, here's our door open to the Arctic with cold air just lurking north of the coastline there. You can see some of the rain mixed with snow generally north of the coast itself, but it wouldn't be a surprise to see that move a little bit further south given the orientation of low pressure wanting to drag that northerly wind right into northern Alaska. And out in the west, high pressure is trying to break up the clouds above, but down below it'll probably stand a pretty good chance of locking in fog for the central Aleutians and out toward the west with a 1,026 millibar high as you get into Tuesday. Let's look at the weather today and tomorrow. Here's a look at temperatures today. Upper 50s and lower 60s for many in southeast today. So rain clouds keeping temperatures down a little bit than what we saw last week. Lower to mid 60s. Some of the warmer spots there around Haines and Skagway, out toward Hyder, Ketchikan, and Annette. We saw some milder readings as well. Prince William Sound back in the 50s today. Seward was 62. Around Homer it was 57. 60 in Kenai. Lower 60s around Anchorage, Talkeetna, Matsu. Areas were generally in the mid to upper 50s this afternoon. Golcana closer to 60, 61 in Northway, 64 degrees around Fairbanks, and as you get up toward Eagle, temperatures there soared back into the mid to upper 70s this afternoon. In fact, the daytime high in Eagle was 78. Fort Yukon was 64 degrees, and then we get back to the Arctic coast, and you'll notice that winter is at least trying to nudge itself forward there. 30s for many across the Beaufort Seacoast, to Barrow at 36, Atkasuk at 39, and down the Chukchi coast a little bit milder. 40s and 50s all the way down into Kotzebue Sound, 50 in Shishmaref, nearly 60 in Nome this afternoon, not too bad. 50 degrees around Galena, and Ruby saw some pretty rainy weather today, and 50 degrees down toward Unalakleet is 57, 61 around Russian Mission. McGrath was 54. Down around Bethel, temps today 61 degrees there, 50s and 60s for the Bristol Bay region, Cape Newenham, a little bit cooler in the 40s, 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, 62 in Kodiak, 52 in St. Paul, and 51 around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska. Overnight low temperatures will drop into the 40s for most of the lower valleys there. Up north of the Brooks Range are in the 30s, below freezing in Barrow. South Central in the 30s and 40s. Some of the cooler spots there also around Prince William Sound and up around the western end of the Copper River Basin. 48 in Kodiak, mid-40s for the Chain, and 40s and 50s for southeast, with highs tomorrow pushing 60 degrees there. South Central back in the mid-50s to low 60s. The Middle Tanana Valley in the upper 50s and lower 60s for you in Fairbanks as well. Lower 40s across the Arctic coast, a little milder tomorrow. 56 around Nome. Southwest in the YK Delta in the upper 50s to nearly 60, and the Alaska Peninsula, places like Sand Point in the low to mid 50s tomorrow. Flying weather, expect a lot of IFR the next couple days across the northern coast and the eastern interior, and also across southwestern Alaska. MVFR to start in southeastern Alaska, and as we get into the afternoon, not much of a change there, but you should see some improvement in ceilings and visibility across some of the places that start out a little bit more on the murky side for your Monday morning. Try saying that 5 times fast. Anaktuvuk Pass, IFR conditions to start your day and end your day tomorrow. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Don't forget about the chance for snow there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, MVFR conditions to last throughout most of your Monday. Same goes for Rainy Pass and on to Windy Pass. Not much of a change as you go around the Horn. Isabel Pass, we expect to see marginal conditions to last throughout most of the day. Mentasta Pass heading toward VFR, it looks like. Tanita Pass may start there, but conditions may worsen just a little bit as the afternoon goes on. Portage Pass leaning over to MVFR conditions throughout your Monday afternoon and will probably hold there for Chilkoot and White Pass throughout the day. There's some big cold out across the Bering, up across the north and also across the northern Gulf Coast with levels below 2,000 feet in many of those locations. There's still some milder air lurking, but these are your low pressure centers there, and those are the places that we'll need to watch for some icing potential. A lot of that light to maybe isolated moderate, but I would think the greatest threat would be up north here across the Brooks Range and into the Kotzebue Sound and Seward Peninsula region, where levels could be as low as 6,000 feet, and in isolated cases perhaps even lower. Elsewhere, 6,000 to 10,000 feet should do the trick across the northern Gulf Coast and the eastern Alaska Range. And it's all because of this kind of wonky jet stream pattern here. You've got the northerly flow working into the Bering Sea, you've got a westerly flow across the northern Gulf, and then you've still got low pressure dragging in that cold air and stretching it closer to the ground across the eastern sections of the Alaska interior. The highest wind speeds we see here are across 100 knots for the northern Gulf and 90 knots up across the Chukchi Sea. All of that's working to keep those low pressure centers energized and moisture falling on top of your location. Low pressures across the eastern interior at 9,000 feet. Winds are generally light, a little bit stronger up around the Beaufort Seacoast, more of a north and easterly flow through the Bering Strait, and west and southwesterly winds across the Gulf anywhere from 10 to about 30 knots with a westerly flow into southeast. It's a little bit stronger at 3,000 feet. Southwesterlies up to 20 knots. across the Beaufort seacoast, north and easterly winds there, and then stronger northerly winds through St. Paul and the eastern Aleutians with generally light winds across the interior. Turbulence, we'll be watching for the strongest areas of chop and bumps across the eastern Beaufort seacoast, the eastern Brooks Range, the western Brooks Range, and into St. Lawrence Island, generally below 5,000 feet. Some thumps and bumps there across the eastern Alaska Range, Wrangell-St. Elias region, and then as you head out toward Haida Gwaii, also below 4,000 feet. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
The 70 nautical mile trip to Skagway from Juneau is fairly straightforward. One noteworthy item is the lack of beaches in the area. The slope of the mountains continues to the bottom of the canal, causing small rocky outcroppings in most areas. There are a couple of small dirt strips located at Glacier Point and Endicott on the west side and Katsahine on the east side. Flying up the Lynn Canal to Taya Inlet is the preferred route to Skagway. The Lynn Canal has several prominent reporting points that are used by the local operators and private pilots.
Connected 63 Percy, Islander at the departure end is headed for Portland Island, runway 26 cleared for takeoff. What do you think? Roger, taxi into position for the
After departing Juneau to the west, you should fly to the right side of Lynn Canal, close to the land mass. Utilize the hemispheric rule for determining your flying altitude. The first prominent departure reporting points are Lena Point, T Harbor, Eagle Beach, and Benjamin Island. Next, you will approach Berners Bay, Bridget Point, and Echo Cove, which will be to the right. After passing Berners Bay, Point St. Mary's is the next reporting point. Keep in mind, Berners Bay is important as a reporting point. Most poor weather conditions for the Lynn Canal are generated in this area. Adiabatic winds descending from the ice fields to the north of Berners Bay can create fog or turbulence depending on the temperature dew point spread. Tour operators will normally report Sherman Point on the other side of Berners Bay and Eldred Rock Lighthouse. Sullivan Island is to the left. The canal splits at this point, with Chilkat Inlet leading to Haines to the left, while Chilkoot Inlet bears right to Skagway.
Sherman Harbor 1048.
Continuing to follow the shoreline to the right, the canal splits again, forming Lutak Inlet to the left, which is a dead end. On the right is Taya Inlet, which takes you to Skagway. Once in Taya Inlet, report Taya Point and fly to the left side of the inlet to conform with prevailing traffic in the area. When approaching Skagway, be alert for tour operators in the area and for helicopter traffic departing and arriving at Skagway. The traffic pattern is at 1,000 feet with right-hand traffic for runway 19 to avoid the town of Skagway. It will appear that the pattern is close to the mountain, and it is. You will find that you are quite close to the trees on the downwind. A close-in base turn around the water tanks to almost immediate final is needed to avoid overshooting the final approach. This is a tight, narrow canyon that consistently generates turbulent winds in the pattern and on the runway. Be aware that there is a bridge with automobile and truck traffic at the end of the final approach end for runway 19. The bridge is used as a final reporting point. There's a school to the left of the runway just beyond the bridge that must not be overflown. Since the runway is narrow and 3,700 feet long, it gives the appearance that you must land on the approach end numbers in order to stop by the end of the runway.
Here's a look at today's sea ice edge. Didn't get such a great look at the ice. That's still marginal in concentration north of Dead Horse, but areas north and east got a little bit better look at the pack ice. That's well offshore. Navigational waters don't have a whole lot to worry about. Most of this is sitting up on the shoals there and is brash ice, but keep an eye on the winds as they'll be changing the next couple days. You can always get the latest information at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. On to southeast now. A broad south and southwesterly flow will be moving through the inner and outer coastlines, 10 to 20 knots in most areas, 2 to 4 foot seas with the highest seas and strongest winds up around the Lynn Canal, of course. South and westerlies coming ashore there from the Dixon entrance all the way up toward Yakutat. Seas on the outer coast ranging from about 7 to 8 feet. And then once the next wave of weather moves through, you'll start getting a little bit more of a draw into low pressure that's approaching the outer coast. Winds will pick up to about 20 to 25, 30 knots in fact outside of Dixon entrance with 9 to 10 foot seas there. And across the inside, 10 to 20 knot winds, with seas coming up from 2 to 4 feet as you get into the Clarence Strait region on Tuesday. For south central, winds are generally light across the north and western Gulf and inside of Prince William Sound. 10 knots there with a 2-foot sea with winds coming out of the east, and south and westerlies through Shelikof Strait and west of the Barren Islands, 15 knots in most of the regions around Kodiak Island and the Barrens with 3 to 5 foot seas. By Tuesday, things start to change up a little bit again as low pressure zooming across the central and southern Gulf, anywhere from 10 to 15 knots there, northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound, southerlies in Cook Inlet with a 3-foot sea, a variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait, and some of the stronger winds will be the northwesterlies being pulled into that low pressure system. It looks like 20 knots there with an 8-foot sea east of Kodiak Island on Tuesday. In Bristol Bay, look for a southwesterly flow, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea, east and northeasterly winds coming down the North Pacific coast at 15 to 20 knots with 7 to 9 foot seas there on Monday. Not a big change in the pattern there as we get into Tuesday, 15 to 20 knots, 8-foot seas there. You'll start to see a little bit more of a variable flow developing throughout the day, but the winds could be as strong as 15 to 20 knots there as we get into your Tuesday around the Alaska Peninsula. For Monday, northerlies coming through the central and eastern chain, north and easterly winds from Unalaska all the way down toward Adak and Atka with 9 to 10 foot seas. Generally light and somewhat variable flow across the western chain with 6-foot seas there on Monday. As we get into Tuesday, a little bit more of a north and westerly push coming through the central and eastern chain up to 20 knots with 6 to 8-foot seas, the strongest and highest of which will be out here across Nikolsky and Unalaska. Easterlies west of Kiska to Attu and northwesterlies from Kiska to Adak, 15 to 20 there with 5 to 6-foot seas on your Tuesday. For the west coast, northerlies should be fairly strong across St. Lawrence Island. 10-foot seas expected in that region. They'll diminish a little bit as you head southward, but still looking at 4 to 6 foot seas across the south and western Capes and into the YK Delta there with that 15-knot wind. 20-knot winds across St. Matthew, 7-foot seas there, and St. Paul and St. George looking at 15 knots from the north and west, 6-foot seas there tomorrow. For Tuesday, a little bit more of a westerly onshore push, and again, this is capable of chewing into the coastline just a little bit there. 15 knots with a 4 to 5-foot sea in some areas, 7-foot seas around St. Matthew, and 5-foot seas from the north and west for St. Paul and St. George. This would be for Tuesday. And for the North Slope, look for that broad, strong northeasterly flow, 20 to 25, with 5 to 8-foot seas from Kaktovik all the way out toward Barrow. Northeasterlies coming down the Chukchi coast as well, 20 to 30-knot winds, and 10-foot seas outside of Kotzebue Sound there on that 30-knot wind from the north and east. For Tuesday, you start to get an onshore push, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea, southwesterlies up toward Cape Lisburn, and then north and easterly winds from Prudhoe Bay to Barrow and Wainwright with a westerly wind remaining around Kaktovik, 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. So changes coming on Tuesday. Here's a recap of what's going on around Alaska. Cold and wet air over the Brooks Range could mean snow around Adigan Pass, a couple inches possible there. Periods of heavy rain may still occur across some parts of the central and eastern interior, and flood watches are posted around the Fairbanks region and eastward for the Goodpaster and Salter rivers as well. Now across southeast, showers will continue for the next several days. Look for periods of fog out west as well. Tomorrow, showers and thunderstorms are possible across areas of the upper and eastern interior as rainfall continues there. And more rain spreading into southeast as we go into Tuesday with showers for the interior. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.